See Tony Lei. Today I want to represent about Raspberry Pi, one of the most fascinating piece of hardware to me. So what is Raspberry Pi? This is a low-cost, small-size computer which has everything in it: a processor, a RAM, connection for um, memory, co- connection for hard drives. Um, it allows people of all age to explore computing, uh, and it also even has ability to interact with the outside world. So the very first Raspberry Pi was released in 2012, the Model B, and they also have the Model A as a cheaper version. The second one was released in February 2015, and this time they upgrade the processor to a quad-core ARM. The third one was released in February 2016 with an upgraded, and they upgraded the processor to 64-bit ARM. With they also added Bluetooth and Wi-Fi capability. They have the Raspberry 4 Model B in June 2019, and the latest version, which is the Raspberry Pi 400, was released in November 2020. They also have other variations for the Raspberry Pi. For example, the Raspberry Pi Zero, the smaller size with reduced I/O. The Raspberry Pi Pico, which was mostly for physical computing. I forget to mention the price in the previous one. So most of the generation costs under $100, and even some variation cost as little as $5. So like I said before, this is a full-fledged computer with AI processor, random access memory, hard drive. No, not hard drive, just connection. And you can plug in the SD card for hard drives. It also has networking adapter and a video controller. My desktop that I built, I paid for over $1,000, and it doesn't have Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and I had to get a adapter for that. So this is the breakdown of the hardware. You can see up top we have the I/O. This is the general purpose I/O that we can plug in all kind of peripherals, cameras, sensor, thermostat, all kind of that. We also had a Ethernet, which is a physical connection for the internet. The RAM varies from 2, 4, 8 GB. The CPU, excuse me, the micro SD slot, in other kind of I/O. Today I want to break down the Raspberry Pi 4, which is the one of the most popular version of the Raspberry Pi. So for the CPU, they use the AMD Cortex A72. This is a quad core with 1.5 GHz and with capability to overclock. It supports both 32 and 64-bit. For the 32-bit is for backward capability. They have a 32 kilobit for data instruction and 48 kilobit instruction for the A1 cache. They have a 1 megabyte of shared L2A cache. The CPU has two set of instructions, the thumb2 instruction, to reduce the size, in turn reduce the energy usage in the ARM set instruction. Memories for the Raspberry Pi 4, we have two for 8 gigabytes. So the 1 gigabyte version they discontinued it recently. The one they use is DDR4 32 SD RAM, which is kind of the same version that I have on my desktop computer, DDR4 32,000. But I think in this case they use the mobile version, and it builds in the memory is built on a 20 nanometer class. Operating system. So because this is a system that for people to exploring, they use an open source Linux kernel, and you can also build a kernel locally for yourself. If you don't want to build it, they have a Raspberry Pi OS. They have many versions of it. The most popular one is the Raspbian. They have a whole lot of like basic function of an OS built into that one. Hard drive, very simple, SD card or external hard drive. So what makes me think that the Raspberry Pi is really fit for this course? First of all, it can run a lot of low-level language like C++ and assembly language. It can also run Python, which is a high-level language, and it allows the user to tinkering around with the hardware with a whole lot of general purpose I/O. Peripherals, like I mentioned before, there is a lot of connection on the Raspberry Pi that we can plug in: camera, microphones, thermostat. Somebody build a home robot, plug it in the Raspberry Pi. We can also have lights and monitors. Project that people do on Raspberry Pi. So like I mentioned before, there's a whole lot of things you can do on a Raspberry Pi. You can do some AI stuff like object recognition, speech recognition, motion recognition. You can do some task automation like reminder, alarm lock, thermostat in the house. I've seen some people build a smart mirror using the Raspberry Pi. You can also use it as a NAS kind of storage. So this is the general purpose I/O that I mentioned before. And that's in my presentation. Thank you.